So everyone can see that we're now into the tax problems, tech solutions panel session. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes letting you know who I am if you've not come across me before, and then I'll ask my panellists to come and join me on the stage once I've tried to flatter them and embarrass them. So I'm Graham, hello. Just to make sure I get my brownie points in early, I'm a chartered tax advisor. And I've been spending the last 31 years advising clients on how to use technology to sort out their processes, predominantly in tax, but also in finance and regulation. I've worked in all of the big firms since Arthur Andersen, with the exception of EY. I've spent a bit of time working in-house. I spent a bit of time consulting in my own name. I'm currently the head of digital at WTS Hansuke. What does that mean for me? Digital is about 6 things, none of which sound very digital to start with. People, process, technology, data, transformation, and governance. My opinion is that you can't look at technology in isolation. You have to understand what people are doing. You have to understand the processes that they go through, the technologies they use, which could be, of course, as simple as pen and paper. You look at the data that they are transforming, and you look at what the controls are that go from one end of that journey to the other. All of that, that's digital to me, and it may be different for everybody else. I started my career, as I say, at Arthur Andersen's many years ago, clearly. My first ever partner was a gentleman called David Rowe, and when he interviewed me in 1993, we found that we had a common interest in machine learning. It was something that he'd studied at university. It was something that I was studying. And he said to me that it was his contention that within 10 years, machine learning would mean that we needed fewer professionals and that tax compliance could be replaced by computer technology. I actually disagreed with him during my interview, and he still recruited me. And in retrospect, it looks like I was probably right. We've had a lot of progress over the last 30 years. Things were in spreadsheets when I started off in this industry. And when I say spreadsheets, I don't say Excel, because Excel hadn't been invented at that point. When I first saw a computer, the first ever spreadsheet had only just been invented. It was called VisiCalc. And it was the killer app that sold the Apple II to accountants in the 1980s. When I joined Arthur Andersen, they were still working with Lotus 123 because Excel was still a couple of years away. And we've gone through from those spreadsheets. We've looked at bespoke software being built. We've looked at automation tools, collaboration tools. We've come into the realms of analytics. And we've even seen AI coming onto the scene in the last few years as tools that tax and finance professionals are using. And what is AI? AI, I used to think, was something very different. Maybe cognitive linguistics, some esoteric little niche area, combined with things like machine learning, maybe applying some really clever algorithms. But a couple of things in the first half of this year have made me question that. WTS Hansuke wants to be one of the most technologically literate organizations. I mean, clearly, otherwise, why did Ali hire me? And one of the things we've done recently is we've applied for a government grant here in the UK to train our staff in AI. Looking through all of that grant process, the number of things that you can train your staff in that qualify as AI is a very, very broad church indeed. It's not machine learning. and it's not just AI. It's everything from the ethics of AI through to the implementation of machine learning, but also into data wrangling, looking at how you tidy and clean the data that will be needed for the training sets. It's automation systems, and it's covering a lot more than you might expect. And I heard exactly the same thing on the CTA address recently. I'm trying to get all my brownie points in early here with the president in the room. Former partner of mine, Conrad Young, was giving his personal view on how AI is going to affect tax. And likewise, he was taking this far broader view that it's not just about machine learning, it's not just about large language models, but it includes all of the data and all of the automation. And that makes me question, does AI mean anything anymore? Or is it now just a synonym for software? Because it seems like anything and everything we're doing with a computer is called AI now. And a last point, does that matter? So obviously, very weighty questions, and to help me with these matters, I have three fabulous panelists. I would let them introduce themselves, but obviously people tend to have a certain degree of modesty, so I'll just try and embarrass them quickly first and then bring them up here. So I'm joined today by Jenny, Alan and Karrie. Jenny Himsley is a Big Four trained chartered accountant, moved in-house and worked in financial services for years, became the FD, and then kind of the dark side claimed her, and she came into a tax software company. She's been working at ARKK ever since, initially as the CFO, and for the last, 2 years as the CEO. This means that she has the accounting background. It means that she's part of an organisation that uses AI as part of its software delivery, and which is providing services not just in tax, but also in an awful lot of different regulatory areas, which I think gives us one very unique perspective. Alan Craven is somebody who's been working in tax for a long time, and for the majority of that time in tax software. We rubbed shoulders many decades ago in the old Abacus software development house that was part of Anderson's and Deloitte's, and these days is called OneSource Corporate Tax. Having done this for a couple of decades, he decided he could do a better job, and he set up Phoenix TP and has been creating complex solutions to complex tax problems ever since, using bespoke algorithms to solve complex tax equations, including things like group matrices and optimizing the group position for banks and financial services, something that the big boys at tax systems and at OneSource have always shied away from doing and claimed was far too difficult. And lastly, we have Karrie Tilburn, and no, you did hear there is a slight difference in the surnames there. We are nothing to do with each other. People have said, I want to quash the rumours now. Karrie was a CGT in-house specialist. She got to know everything about how to do CGT for wealth managers and banks, moved into consultancy, developed strong data skills, strong implementation and migration skills, started questioning how good the software products were that she was having to use, and likewise decided I can do better, and went ahead and built a product which knocks the opposition into a cocked hat. So we now have someone who understands taxes from the person's side rather than the corporate side. We have someone who looks at the complexities of tax and algorithms, and we have somebody that looks at finance and regulation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel to the stage. So I have threatened these people with a few questions in advance, just to make sure that they can limber themselves up. But to just warm them up for yourselves, a very simple and straightforward question to start with, which is, what technology promise do you remember from the past that never quite came to fruition? And let's go from the far end. Alan.
Right, well, I do recall, so I think it was in around about the late or mid-1990s, and there was just going to be this network computer. And this was, what was driving this was Oracle, and they were working with other companies as well, and it was going to be a computer which didn't have a hard disk, and it was all data was going to be online. It didn't fly, not surprisingly, because obviously the connectivity in those days was a little bit slower than what it is today. So, yeah, that's what I recall.
Karrie?
Too many to mention, actually, in one room, in one question, and I think I'd probably get sued. But many transformations and implementations across the wealth management industry have very much overpromised and underdelivered, in my opinion. So I'll just leave that one.
Probably safest if there are any lawyers in the room. Jenny?
And I've gone a bit out on a limb. I actually remember probably about 10, 12 years ago watching on the TV, you know how they have these sort of conferences in Vegas where they show all the new funky electronics that are coming out. And it was a fridge that could detect when your food was out of date and then reorder that food. And they haven't quite got there, but I did Google it before this, and Samsung are bringing something out that's sort of similar. It has a camera on it, it detects what comes in and out, and then it suggests recipes for you to cook to use your food that's going out of date. So not quite there, but something similar coming along. So yeah, we'll see if that really works out for them. I'm guessing it might not, but...
Okay. Right, well then, let's go and have a look at the area of tax problems, tech solutions. And the first thing I want to ask you all about is automation. Clearly, automation is something which really matters to an awful lot of people trying to be as efficient as possible with the limited resources that they have available. And as I was alluding to in the introduction, a lot has happened over the last decades, going from bespoke software through to collaboration. You've had more recently things like RPA tools, data wrangling tools. But all of this seems to somehow lead back to Excel. We've never weaned a trained accountant off Excel, other spreadsheets are available, over the last 30 years. So have we gone full circle? Will we ever get away from spreadsheets? Jenny?
A very good question, and yeah, I still love Excel. I am passionate about tax technology, don't get me wrong, but there will still always be that time where you need to download something and you need to do something a little bit different in Excel, whether that's, most of the time it's not core to the process, it's not core to what we're doing. So yes, I think we have done a full circle, but I think there's some brilliant lessons that have been learned along the way. So when we look at all of these different technologies that have come in, and they've come into fashion and out of fashion, ultimately they have, we are much further ahead from a sort of compliance perspective, from an efficiency perspective. I'm sure Karrie will chat a bit about her technology, but yes, there will always be a use for Excel, but I think that we cannot rely on it. It will end up being the sort of the quick and dirty default every now and then, rather than the main sort of driver of a process, and that is the way that we're moving us, in the world. So, yeah, I think it will always be there, but definitely around the edges, not core to the finance function, is my my thoughts.
Karrie, do you think that you agree it can be taken off the critical path, even if it can't be completely removed?
Eventually. I think we have quite a long way to go with our data, how we handle data in systems. A lot of systems focus on the calculations, but not necessarily how we manage, look after, and monitor the data and the updates. I do also love spreadsheets and Excel, and I'm a great believer in what you can achieve with it, but not everyone likes an Excel spreadsheet. So you simply cannot have processes off platform where it requires complex macros, VLOOKUPs, because not everyone's going to be able to do that for you across your business, and it's high risk.
Alan, anything to add?
Yes. Well, personally, I think Excel is an amazing tool, and it also gets even more powerful new functionalities added to it. But obviously, there's certain risks. And I think also it's worthwhile just referring to what surveys have been carried out as to the level of errors in workbooks. And surveys have frequently found about 80% of workbooks have got errors. And some surveys even believe that it should be higher. It's over 90%. So they still pose incredible risk. I used to work in Big Four. We sent out some quite complex Excel workbooks, and it was really important that the integrity was strong and it couldn't be broken. So how did we do that? We made sure that we used protection in Excel workbooks where you can use it. Frequently, workbooks don't have protection, formally can be manipulated, and there's no audit trail that someone has actually made a change to a workbook. You've got alternatives like Alteryx, and they can accomplish what you could otherwise do in Excel, but in far quicker time, and also with far less risk. So if you have got access to Alteryx or Power Automation, then use those tools. Another, I think, really big risk with Excel is the maintenance of workbooks. And it's the owner of the workbook knows what's gone into the workbook. And if that person leaves, then someone else has to take over. Do they know what that person was thinking if they use VBA? Do they understand the VBA, first of all? So you've got quite a few risks with Excel. But if you use Alteryx, then it's far more visible. You don't need a programming language. So you still need Excel. It's got some really good strengths, but you just need to be very careful how you use it.
So I think there are risks. We don't want it on the critical path. But it's always going to be a useful kind of a sidebar tool, is what we're saying. I do have a small question for the audience that I'll try and frame very quickly. I did a project a few years ago where we were looking at the processes that a tax department was going through. And we were talking about how they use one-source corporation tax, in fact, for doing their corporate tax compliance. And we were just going through step by step what they did. And we got to this point where they went, and then we've got it here and it's kind of ready for review. And then the tax manager for this very large company said, and then what I do is I get out my spreadsheet where I've written my own tax calculation in full, and I compare mine to what's come out of the software product that has got a large team of engineers across the world building it. And if it isn't the same as mine, I believe mine. And I think that this is a lot of why we see so much Excel, is that accountants and tax professionals still have a certain level of mistrust of software, and they just want to check. And so just a very quick show of hands, and if you don't want to admit to this, just raise your hand slightly. Have you ever checked another piece of software in Excel? Oh, yes, there's a lot of people who are not embarrassed about that, aren't there? Fantastic, thank you. Moving swiftly on. We've had a couple of nice AI sessions already, and I'm thoroughly looking forwards to taking with both hands the software tools that we were looking at earlier with our colleagues from WTS in Germany. Please do form an orderly queue at the back of the room during drinks, and I'll take down the names of everyone that wants a copy, and I'll make sure that we get the English version over here as soon as Michael lets me have it. What we've done, though, is focused on the kind of the generative AI side of it, and obviously AI means a lot of other things. So can we use AI for more complex things? Not just generating documents, but for reviewing big calculations, for doing things like tax prep and tax planning. Alan, perhaps you'd like to take that first.
Sure, yes. Well, it's on my journey in today, and there's an email, and actually we've posed the question I've seen quite often, which is, AI is advancing and there's so much more power and functionality than before, but can you use technology to make decisions within software? And the answer was, like preparing computations, and the answer was, well, in straightforward cases, then that would be possible. But for more complex cases, it was on the far horizon. So I thought, it's interesting, I've seen this response before. But in my view, there is another technology, a subset of AI that is available, and it can actually make decisions in tax. And we're talking about quite complex decisions. The technology is called mathematical optimization, and it's not black box, it's not machine learning. It is interpretable AI, so you can understand decisions that are being made, why they have made decisions. It's also not it is deterministic, so when you run it, it always gives you the same answer again and again, which is unlike what I've seen with ChatGPT. So this technology can be used in tax, but I would admit straight away that it's not for every set of computations you're trying to prepare. It's where the decisions that you're trying to make are not obvious. And this is where this technology comes into play, and it's very suitable. As I say, it's not a black box, it's not machine learning. And the tools that are available, there are certain very specialized tools, and so your selection of tools is critical. You have to write a model, and how you structure the model is also very critical. As an end result, your solution could be provided in literally a few seconds, or it could otherwise be minutes, hours, or you've actually used up all the memory in the computer because of how you've written the model and the software that you're using. So when I refer to complex cases, I'm looking at a group of companies where you're making decisions about loss relief, the interest restriction, group relief with non-conterminous accounting periods, the sequence of claims, the interest restriction, DTR, really complex decisions. So this is the theory, and what about has actually been used in tax? I'm aware of another situation, and this was a group of companies that had a large number of chargeable disposals, and it was used to work out rollover relief decisions. Now, I've also had an experience using the technology, and I built a solution, and it has performed extremely well. And it might be useful just to refer to a couple of instances to give you an indication of how quick and how complex the cases have been. One of them was quite a modest-sized banking group, and a lot of time was spent on the computations, and they felt we've got a good answer, but maybe not the best. And so I took the data, and I produced a better result. They thought the improvement could be X, but the improvement was actually 12 times greater. And the time that it took was 0.3 seconds, and out came the output. It was validated. It was correct. Now, to give you also indication of the complexity that can be used, there was an instance where a group had different groups for group relief, interest restriction. They had non-conterminous accounting periods, transfer pricing adjustments, high-value capital allowances. And it can also be used in a multi-year. So coming back to your point about the forecasting, this was a really good challenge. Could it deal with this immense complexity? The tool that was being used was an incredible tool in Excel. And it was incredible. It was a Mona Lisa of Excel workbooks. But I knew that it was trying to do so much. So again, we took the data, and it produced a better answer. Over the 4 years, it then came up with a reduction in aggregate CT payable. And in that time instance, it took around about 3 seconds to get the initial solution, and then it goes through an iteration of just fine-tuning and making sure that you actually come up with what would be a solution that tax professionals could be happy with. I should also stress it's not trying to replace what a tax professional would do, but it's to then present information that a tax professional could use, maybe run different scenarios. So it's technology that I've seen work, and I think it's got a lot of potential.
Thank you, Alan. I think it's really interesting to remember that AI is that broad church. It's not all just about large language models. It's not all just about creating tools that can play games of chess or Go. You can build something which is designed to specifically solve a tax problem or a finance problem or a regulatory problem. And if you define it correctly, you can get the right answer every time or the best answer every time. And it doesn't take a lot of processing power. And as we start thinking more about, I guess, the ESG credentials of what we're doing, we don't want to be creating an energy drain the size of, I don't know, the economy of Iceland just to decide what we want to eat for dinner tonight. And I think that kind of specialist approach can really pay dividends. Jenny?
Yes.
ARK uses AI as well?
We do use AI, yeah, very much sort of probably in the more mainstream at the moment. So there's machine learning in our products. We're just implementing the sort of generative AI sort of piece in there, which obviously a lot of products are doing. What we are finding is actually a large multitude of our clients now, our new clients, have to tick that AI box. So procurement, if you don't tick that AI box, then they're out the door. So that's, something that businesses absolutely have to be able to do.
AI is requiring there to be AI in your product.
Absolutely, yes. So procurement, it's a little box.
It's just
that
a
they
tick
like to
box.
tick. It's a tick
not
box.
that they've got a need for it.
There is not necessarily a need for it, but it's a box that procurement are asking to be ticked these days. But the interesting thing that we're doing at the moment, that we're sort of R&Ding, is really trying to look at data models and how we can look at previous years for comparisons for sort of graphs and tables and output and Power BI. Sounds simple, but if you think how much changes one year to the next, there's a huge amount of manipulation that often goes into the background to try and get models that you can compare to produce some of this nice output. And we're looking at how we can use AI to pull that together, so you can just pretty much dump in what you've got from prior years, and the AI will recognise enough similarities to pull this data together and give you some nice outputs that you can understand. So that's what we're currently working on at the moment. We've done some testing with some clients and going well so far. But yeah, there's definitely some really deep insights, as Alan said, but also just some beautiful insights, I suppose. From our perspective, you can get some just really nice outputs that you can, chuck out in a board meeting very quickly, or have a conversation with your team about, which sometimes is a struggle, I think, out of technology. You can get the answers, but they're not always looking too good.
Karrie, any thoughts?
Ooh, quite a few. In my space, I don't see it doing the calculations and the scenarios just yet. I think we don't have enough good data. What we're working on is fixing the data first, and then using the AI to provide your management stats. So if you've got clear, transparent data available, you should be able to interrogate that data in any which way you want. And that's where we will be employing the AI to help.
What a beautiful answer, given that my next question is about data. So, again, if I step back in time a little bit, data was something that only the computer scientists talked about. And then people started to appreciate that the information that needed to go into systems was actually data. And suddenly we started seeing data warehouses everywhere. And if you didn't have a data warehouse or a tax data warehouse, what were you doing? And then we had data lakes, and people have started talking about data oceans. And my question is, no matter how big you make all of these data, even larger bodies of water, can you ever actually find the data that you wanted? And was it in the data lake anyway? So, Karrie, what do you think about the idea of trying to drain the ocean into a single database?
I have a real problem, actually, with data warehouses and lakes generally, because where I see them being used is to pull lots of bad data out of lots of different sources across a tech stack that is trying to talk to each other not very well. And what tends to happen is all this data comes through to try and do more reporting or more MI, but it's ineffective because the core data is not good enough at all. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's a waste of resource. You still need to have some oversight of the data, but the way it's being used isn't helpful. I think a lot of the data that's required across the wealth management side, at least, it's very underrated. Even your asset static data, that's not always correct. People rely on data vendors, that's not always correct. Your tax calculations have to take information from your core investor, from your assets, from your environment, from your transaction type. It's not just as simple as fixing one tiny bit of data and everything flows into the lake.
Is there also a danger that we rely too much on people who don't have the specialist subject matter expert knowledge of what the data is needed for at the end? And so what happens is somebody in IT goes, oh, you need a number for revenue or tax. And they just look in a data dictionary, find the first one that looks similar and engineer that to be your data.
Yeah, absolutely. We have there's a misconception also that technology that's already doing the jobs, it's working, it's implemented, so we don't have a problem with that, or we don't have a problem with this, because they think it's been taken care of. In my view, we've only created software because it's not. It's times have changed, CGT, income tax, the whole wealth investment, even corporate action processing has changed dramatically over the last 10 years. And the systems that have been available just aren't quite up to date.
So there's almost an issue that if you don't fully understand the data lineage and you don't have the definitions all the way through, you're just immediately into trying to manage data quality, and that is pretty much the opposite of what happens with data lakes, where it's just throw everything in and hope for the best. Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a similar experience. So I would say out of our customer base, probably about 80 to 90%, we actually go back to source systems, even if they have got a data lake or a data ocean or whatever you might want to call it. And for a number of reasons. One, often IT controls that data warehouse or that data lake, and actually to get access to it is sometimes difficult. And that's because it's got a whole ream of information in, and maybe we only need a small part of it. And actually it's easier to go back to that source system to get that small part that we actually need. And as you were saying, you know, the data quality, because often the individuals that are dealing with it are often IT-based, the data that's in there can sometimes be questionable, and then to go back and cleanse that data is often difficult because you're having to involve IT as opposed to the people that really care about it or really understand it. So yeah, we prefer and generally do try and extract data from source systems. Whilst I'm sure there is benefits in the data lakes, whatever you want to call them, we tend not to work with them.
Interesting. Alan, anything to add?
Well, just one tale, actually, which is, I think I'll never forget this, but it was a really important project. And we were going to get data from a warehouse. And so, yes, we ensured that, yes, we can retrieve the data. And then there was a sample taken just to make sure, we can get the right data back. But there was an assumption that because your sample was successful, that all the data you require is going to be available. And we were quite some way into the project. And then we started, let's try and get all this data pulled back. And it wasn't all there. And it wasn't under our control. We couldn't add to what was in that warehouse. So potentially the whole project was going to collapse because steps weren't taken earlier on to make sure that all the data was there. Fortunately, there was a good end to the story. There was another method we can get the data, but I will never forget that situation that we run into.
That sounds like quite a moment.
It was.
So the next thing I want to talk to you about is what is driving technological change. Again, I think if I go back and think through my long and illustrious, I hope, career, most of the time people have been putting technology in place because of efficiency. It's always been, can we do things quicker? Can we do them and save cost? Can we redirect expensive resources to do something more useful with their time rather than rekeying data? But it feels like in the last few years, that's been overtaken by regulatory requirement. And whether you're thinking about electronic filings or audit files, you have to provide more and more data in greater levels of detail and granularity for a variety of regulations across the world. So is all of our technological advance in tax departments, in finance departments, actually driven now by regulation rather than efficiency? I think of the three of you, Jenny, you probably have more products that are driven by regulation,
Yep.
so maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think the answer is yes, and I think it's for a number of different reasons. There's a whole ream of projects that you want to do when you're sitting in a finance or a tax department, and unfortunately, the ones that are required from a compliance perspective are the ones that come to the top of the list, and there are a lot of them right now. So I think a lot of the time they are making the cut first, and across the board, you know, from a regulatory perspective, the ECB, the FCA, all those sort of banking regulatory bodies, there is increased regulation coming out, you know, year on year, more and more sort of XML reporting that we have to do further upstream and downstream. So there's more from that side of things, but also on the tax side of it, which is the other sort of part of our software, you know, we're currently looking at some Pillar 2 software at the moment for the global minimum tax, and we have had some transfer pricing software on the market for a while, and we've had, I'll be honest, limited success. People are often quite happy doing their transfer pricing in Excel spreadsheets. You know, they'll come, they have multiple chats with you. You know, some people we've spoken to maybe 10 times. But actually to bite the bullet to put software in, it's not the top of their priority list. Even though they know, as you say, it'll save them money, it'll make them more efficient. It will probably eliminate the errors that they maybe have in these Excel spreadsheets. But the introduction of global minimum tax, suddenly this has all suddenly come to the top of the agenda again. Transfer pricing is suddenly going to have some focus on it because of the global minimum tax coming in. So yes, ultimately, if there is a compliance element to it, it is absolutely pushing technology to be put in place within businesses. And I think that that's really a lot of the time what's driving it rather than the efficiencies that it's bringing, even though it will bring efficiencies, and we would like to think and hope that people realise those within the businesses as well, but mostly compliance, in my opinion.
Karrie.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, generally. No for me.
Yeah, okay.
So I probably work in the least regulated part of tax for wealth management. So the capital gains tax reports and the CTV reports, you're supposed to provide them, but there's no real regulation around the standards or what you must incorporate as part of your models. So we tend to see all the other regulatory items frogging over the top of us. Frogging? Frog hopping? Jumping?
Leapfrogging, yeah.
Made my own phrase up then. But yeah, so we see less push for us to provide those changes.
So you see it, you're just not the beneficiary of it.
Yeah, which is quite frustrating because there's a lot that overlaps on the CGT side, and all the transactional data that you have to monitor and manage as part of ensuring that your CGT and your income reports are correct overlaps with your MiFID, FATCA, everything. So it makes more sense to have it far better managed at source, and then it gives you all the other benefits.
Well, everyone out here has heard the message. Alan?
But I don't have anything else to add on this particular question, Graham.
Excellent. But in which case, I will come to you first in just a moment. We've got several other things that we could talk about, but I want to just try and come to an end very quickly. So we've got a couple of minutes, hopefully, if there are a question or two in the audience. So I'm just going to ask you all to put your crystal balls in front of you and just tell me what your one prediction is of something that's going to change in the technology sphere before we come to FSTC 25. Alan?
My answer would be AI. I think since November 22, there's been an incredible amount of activity, investment, and we've all heard about hype and hallucinations. And there's this Gartner cycle, hype cycle, and I really relate to this, where earlier on you've got some new technology and there's a lot of interest and you're going up. And then there's some little bit of disillusionment as to some of the false promises that have been made, and reality is a little bit different from what's actually been promised. So you come down, but then you start to come up because reality is then becoming to the fore. So that's my prediction, that I think we're going to, maybe, I don't know, maybe at the top at the moment, then we're going to come down. That's my prediction.
Okay. Karrie?
I'm going to be quite pessimistic.
Feel free. We want predictions, not optimism.
The pace of change is just too slow generally across technology. So I think we'll make baby steps as opposed to strides. We'll start seeing more of a movement towards better management, but whether we'll see that reflected across the market in that space of time, I'm less convinced.
Thank you. Jenny?
I'm going to be really negative, actually. So I think we are going to see a rise of businesses that are using generative AI, a sort of rise in prosecutions and problems coming because of that, because I think that the way in which some businesses using generative AI is going to result in some outcomes that are potentially cause some questionable decisions, I suppose, and I can see businesses coming back and sort of, lawsuits and things coming out of that. So, I think whilst I think it's brilliant, and whilst I think that there's loads that can be done with it, it has to be used very carefully, and I think that we'll see that sort of balancing act, to that seesaw maybe taking a bit of a rock over the next 12 months or so. So we'll see.
Well, we'll obviously have to come back and see whether or not any of those are close to the mark in 12 months' time. How are we doing for time? Can we take a quick question? Yeah, does anybody want to put a hand up, have a question for our panel of tech people?
Can you talk about humans in the loop, please?
Humans in the loop. Lovely. Any of you like to take that first?
Some of you have spoken about AI systems.
Yeah.
And sort of what I perceived as an inference of reliability on them, notwithstanding your final crystal ball moment. But if you're going to rely on the output, and let's assume the data is good data, where does understanding the process come in the absence of, say, regulation and standards, which is something that Michael spoke about? His aspiration was a common benchmark, if you like, a common standard that we all work to globally.
I think it's a really good question. Perhaps if I can answer it by looking at two AI solutions that I've looked at and conducted limited reviews on. One of them, it was very well designed. They recognise the human input, and it was using machine learning, so the black box is then apparent. Can you trust the output? And the way that they've actually dealt with this, I thought was really good. And there was a rating system about the confidence level in the output, which was very helpful. Good audit trail. So they thought about this. But another system I looked at, and I must admit, I was pretty uncomfortable with what I saw. There was a banner as to what it was trying to do, and I then used this, and it could get very good results, but because of the way that the user has used it, you could get, I think, really poor and dangerous results. So the human interaction was really important. As I say, I was really uncomfortable. So, really good question.
I think when you're making, if you're providing a service to clients, whether it be wealth management or doing their tax returns, I don't think there should be any replacement of the human interaction in those scenarios. So the ability to make decisions should still be key to that relationship management, and the AI that is used should be to enhance the process and the job, not to replace it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of in agreement. I think however you're using that AI, it needs to surface how it's made those decisions. So, I mean, it doesn't need to just pop out at the end with the answer. It can be used to generate the journey along the way, shall we say. So, yeah, you should be able to follow that decision process through and trust the output. Yeah.
I think there's a broader workforce question here as well. From my perspective, you've got to make sure that when you have AIs, they do the things that they're good at. Looking for patterns in data, it's something that people can't visualize in 1,400 different dimensions, but an AI can. And if it then can see those exceptions to the patterns, it can spot those anomalies, it should be escalating those outliers to a professional to do the review of. My concern is that could be seen as replacing junior resource. And if you end up doing that, then how do our tax professionals of the future gain their experiences and get their learning? And actually, one of the biggest challenges around AI isn't the short term, because we already have professionals who are experts, who can do that review, who can look at those exceptions. It's about understanding what our workforce model looks like over the next 10 to 15 years to make sure that the people that are studying for their professional exams now, the juniors in my firm, the juniors that are working with you, have the opportunities to continue to learn and professionally develop so that they can question the outputs from the AIs later on. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges that we'll be seeing over the next few years. So I guess that's my prediction.
On that, though, do you find that the people coming in to train for accountancy and tax is a bit lower on the younger side anyway, presently? Is it not?
Sorry, a bit what?
Younger people, do you still have the uptake of young professionals in the same numbers these days? Because I thought I saw a study where there was less junior people coming into these roles.
I mean, Helen's probably going to be able to tell us exactly what the difference is between registrations for professional exams over the last few years.
I'm just wondering if the AI might help and bring in a different...
It's very difficult to say because of COVID, because we have spikes and troughs, peaks and troughs, but I would say fractionally lower, but no, not just my professional body, other professional bodies are launching things like diplomas in tax technology. That's something we launched 18 months ago, very much because of what Graham has said, thinking to, well, what does the tax advisor of the future look like, and what knowledge and skills and attributes are they going to need for a digital future. So that's been popular, but we're also doing a review of the mainstream qualification to say, well, what does it need to look like? And, you know, we might not be there in the short term, but it's more about, well, in 3, 5, 10 years' time, what does that advisor, how do they get there, and what do they need to have?
I think it's an evolution, isn't it? I mean, I had a degree in photocopying when I was at KPMG, and filing, which no one does these days. Yeah. So I could have quite happily spent many less hours, days, and weeks in that filing room and doing photocopying. So I think it's making sure that there's a nice balance, isn't there, and evolving what these juniors are learning.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed to Jenny, to Karrie and to Alan. And thank you all for your attention. And on to the next part of the afternoon.